Hi there, I'm Renos Vakis, lead economist at the World Bank, and your host for Accelerating Development Ideas for Impact. This is not your typical podcast. It's an AI powered conversation brought to you by the World Bank Institute for Economic Development, where we unpack the latest research with one goal in mind, turning big ideas into real world impact. Let's get started.
Thank you for the introduction, Renos. Here's a number that's hard to ignore. Nearly 99% of people worldwide breathe air that fails to meet safety standards. That means almost everyone listening right now is affected. Welcome to our show and to the third episode of our World Development Report 2025, Standards for Development miniseries, where we explore the report in more details. Today we zoom in on chapters 6, 7, and 8, and what they reveal about the hidden systems behind outcomes like this.
It really is a fascinating section. The overarching theme here is how standards act as the hidden architecture of development. We are talking about the rules that govern everything from the air we breathe to how local governments build schools.
Right, and the report uses a very clear framing for this. It argues that standards can either be a springboard for progress or a straitjacket that stifles growth. It entirely depends on how they are applied in the real world.
Exactly. And the scale of what these standards manage is staggering. For instance, the report notes that nearly 99% of people worldwide breathe air that is dirtier than World Health Organization guidelines.
99%. That essentially means almost everyone listening to our show right now is affected by this.
They are. And when we look at the public sector side, the global public sector employs 373 million people. That is a massive workforce relying on vast bureaucratic systems to translate policy into action.
That leads us right into the first major policy takeaway from Chapter 6. It explores this idea of a compliance gap. Most people assume that adopting a strict international standard automatically solves a problem, but the data shows something else.
Yes, the reality is quite different. Many low and middle-income countries copy and paste highly stringent international standards without having the local capacity to enforce them.
So the rule exists on paper, but it doesn't actually work in practice.
Precisely. Both lower-income and higher-income countries adopt similarly strict legal standards for particulate matter once standards are in place, which is known as PM 2.5. But lower-income countries often can't enforce them. That creates a massive compliance gap, leaving actual pollution levels dangerously high.
That makes perfect sense. You can't manage what you can't measure. The outline points out that only 4% of African governments and 7% of Asian governments provide reliable data on air quality.
And without that data, enforcement is impossible. Furthermore, when standards vary widely between regions, the consequences often shift to the poorest populations.
There is a very specific example in the report about pollution leakage. In 2009, the United States tightened its battery disposal rules.
Yes, that well-intentioned policy shift simply pushed the battery recycling industry across the border into Mexico. As a direct result, there was a 21% increase in low birth weight rates near those Mexican recycling plants.
That is a stark reminder of how these policies affect real human lives. An expectant mother in one country pays the price for a fragmented standard in another.
That is exactly why the report advocates for matching capacity to ambition. Standards must be tailored to local realities to actually work. China provides a massive success story on this front with its war on pollution.
Right, they didn't just declare a strict rule and hope for the best.
Exactly. They paired their national standards with automated monitoring, strict data disclosure, and official accountability. It was a complete system.
And the results followed quickly. Within 5 years, that comprehensive approach reduced PM 2.5 levels by 40%.
40% in just 5 years. That is what happens when standards match enforcement capacity. Another great solution from Chapter 8 is the use of tiered standards.
I read about that. It's about moving away from a rigid pass-or-fail system. The report highlights Rwanda's Grow with Standards program.
And this is the part I love. Rwanda helped over 1,000 micro, small, and medium enterprises. Instead of shutting them down for missing international norms, the program allowed them to progressively improve their practices over time until they could meet those standards.
That seems like a much more sustainable path forward. Let's pivot to Chapter 7, which looks at the hidden wiring of the state itself. This section fundamentally redefines government waste.
It really does. Most people assume that when governments fail to deliver public goods, the root cause is outright corruption or bribes.
But the data points to organizational mismanagement instead. In Ghana, local governments are tasked with building critical infrastructure like schools and latrines. Yet, 1 in 3 of those projects is never completed.
Think about what that means on the ground. A community expects a new school, but the children never get to sit in that classroom, and it wastes nearly 20% of public investment. The report clearly states this waste is driven primarily by inaccurate data, planning failures, and delayed payments.
It's just a breakdown in the basic wiring of the government. And this isn't just an issue in developing nations. We see similar mismanagement in wealthy countries.
Absolutely. Look at the United States federal government. An analysis of over 122,000 procurement projects revealed massive delays.
Yes, the numbers here are staggering. Projects expected to last 244 days actually took 486 days. The cost overruns increased the initial award prices from $65.2 billion to $103.9 billion.
The solution here is better governance. Moving from a traditional rule of thumb to a rule by standards. Governments need measurable metrics for how they hire, pay, and procure, replacing personal biases with actual data. They also need standards that uphold the quality of administrative procedures, ensuring that the right bureaucratic actions are taken.
And when they link bureaucratic actions to measurable results, efficiency spikes. In Punjab, Pakistan, implementing performance pay for tax collectors increased revenue collection by roughly 40% in just 2 years.
We see the exact same principle working in education. In Andhra Pradesh, India, providing teacher bonuses tied to student test scores improved learning outcomes across all subjects.
Here's the tricky part policymakers face, though. You can easily create too many rules. The report warns about the danger of administrative overload.
That is a very real friction point. The plan says straightforward, but the reality is often a maze of paperwork. Currently, bureaucrats allocate 20 to 30% of their work time strictly to compliance tasks like record keeping.
Which obviously diverts their time away from actual service delivery. So the goal has to be smart calibration.
Exactly. Data from 39 countries reveals a fascinating trend. As nations grow wealthier, they tighten the legal deadlines for paying contractors.
But they keep the actual share of on-time payments relatively constant. That proves they are matching the stringency of the rule to the operational capacity of the state.
It's all about finding that balance. Now, as we look toward the global future in Chapter 8, it becomes clear that standard setting is incredibly unequal globally.
It really is. To ensure standards act as a springboard, low and middle-income countries must have a seat at the table. Right now, high-income countries send between 30 and 60 times the number of delegates to international standard-setting meetings compared to lower-income countries.
That imbalance has to change. We need diverse voices to handle the emerging global threats we are facing. The global community must proactively set standards for these threats before the harms become irreversible.
Artificial intelligence is the perfect example of this polycrisis. Unregulated artificial intelligence is projected to drive data center electricity demand to 945 terawatt-hours annually by 2030.
945 terawatt hours. The report notes that amount is roughly equivalent to the entire yearly power consumption of Japan.
It's a massive challenge. Policymakers must actively participate in international forums and invest heavily in their national quality infrastructure. And above all, they need to view standards differently. They aren't just rigid commands. When properly calibrated, they are flexible tools for continuous societal improvement. If we get the hidden wiring right, we can build a much more resilient future.
And if today's discussion on air quality sparked your interest, we actually explored this topic in more depth in a previous episode. Episode 27, Monitoring, Managing and Markets, Tools for Clean Air, Part 1, Monitoring. It takes a closer look at how measurement and data systems form the foundation for making standards work in practice.
It's a great companion to this episode, especially if you're curious about how something as technical as monitoring can shape real-world outcomes.
Over to you, Renos.
Thank you for joining us. You can find the full report on our website. Just follow the link in the description. Be sure to subscribe to be the first to know about upcoming episodes. And before you go, how do you plan to put what you learn into practice? And what topics you'd like us to explore next? We'd love to know. Until then, goodbye.